Hello, sex kittens. Thursday, and I'm going to do Martin Wolf today. He's done a series, 3 articles on deleveraging and crisis in the United States. And I'm going to quote from his number 2 and number 3. The balance sheet recession in the US. Now, Martin Wolf, you must have come across him sometime. I think his job title is something like Senior Economics Editor of the Financial Times. But this is more in his blog section that he allows himself on the Financial Times. Last week, in Debt Deleveraging and Crisis in the US, the first of the articles in the trilogy, I discussed what happened to US debt and borrowing prior to and since the crisis. In this post, I look at the associated pattern of income and expenditure. It looks at the microeconomics of deleveraging, or what Richard Koo, our friend, of Nomura Research calls balance sheet recessions. I look at this through the lens of sectoral financial balances, an analytical framework learned from the work of the late Wynne Godley, picked up and used as a basis by most all of the MMT people. The essential idea is that since income has to equal expenditure for the economy as a whole, which is the same thing as saying that savings equal investment, so the sums of the difference between income and expenditure of each of these sectors of the economy must be zero. It all must balance out. These differences can also be described as financial balances, just a different name for it. Thus, if a sector is spending less than its income, it must be accumulating net claims on other financial sectors. If you're saving, we know by the banking thing, you've put your savings in there and they've been lent to somebody else. Yeah. We'll try and keep up and follow. So we get a couple of charts. Financial balances in the United States economy since 1990 as a percentage of GDP. Government financial balances in pink. We can follow them that they were doing well, as in, well, they were in the black in the year 2000 because loads of people were paying loads of tax because of the boom, or the dot-com boom. So loads of taxes were going to the federal government and everything was positive. Very rare, very rare. But then was the dot-com crash and things went very negative again in the pink. And you can see obviously they've been negative ever since. But there was a rise up. It wasn't so negative in the year 2006 and 7 because of the housing boom. It wasn't positive money to the central government, but it was better than it was. But then there was the housing crash and down went the government's books in further into the red. And you can see they've kind of flattened out to getting slightly whitely better now. In blue we've got private financial balances, the people. And again we've got it looks like in the build up to the dot-com crash they thought they were so wealthy that they were spending more money than they even had. They were in negative territory because they thought they were doing so well. There was the dot-com crash and they went shit, better start saving, and went slightly positive for a while. Then the housing seemed to make them rich again, so they spent more than they earned. And then the housing crash, and they realized the world isn't Walt Disney, and we better stop spending and start saving some more money. And then it's gone positive. They are not now spending more than they earned, and it's gone positive. The other one is the foreign financial balances that we won't go into for the moment. Next chart, US household and business financial balances. We've kind of done the household balances, so we can do the business financial balances and just concentrate on the end bit there, that since the financial crisis, they've gone well into the black. They're stashing the money away. That's what we can say. And there are other charts which show that they are now not investing, let's say, in the future. The money is just being stocked by the financial people, the business side, because there's no point investing in the country, in their company, because the households aren't spending. The households are saving. There's not as much money going through their companies, so there's no point expanding, investing into expansion. So it's all stopped because everyone's scared of the present and is fearful of the future. Right. Let's do some Martin Wolf reading. The overall story then is of an economy driven not by fiscal policy decisions, but by private sector decisions taken for reasons that have nothing to do with the long-term fiscal prospects of the economy. Meanwhile, the government as a whole was driven into huge deficit by these private sector decisions. That is exactly what one expects to happen in a huge balance sheet recession such as this one. The question is, of course, how the government should respond to its sudden shift into massive deficit. And this is the big question that the world, certainly all the Western world, has got to answer for itself. So much so, I shall run that sentence again. The question is, of course, how the government, or all governments, should respond to their sudden shifts into massive deficits. That depends on how the economy best adjusts to balance sheet adjustments in the private sector. If the government is to move back into balance, by cutting spending and raising taxes, trying to force it, this is austerity, how would the private sector respond to being forced back into balance? Would it spend more because of a sudden surge of confidence about fiscal prospects? Or would it cut back more, so driving the economy into depression, thereby at least partially defeating the effort to improve the fiscal position? And the last thing's about the foreign balances, which is imports, exports. We're going to leave it out. Basically, does austerity make everyone feel so confident that the economy is going to get better that they will spend? And if the households spend, then we know that the businesses will spend. The results so far say no, they won't. They will save more until they see evidence of the economy having improved. It's one of these catch-22 jobbies. Households, businesses aren't going to invest until households spend more. Households aren't going to spend more until the economy is better. The economy won't be better until the businesses spend more, investing more, employing more. Dunk. So, we get to the third in the triptology of Martin Wolfisms, getting out of debt by adding debt. Yes, I'm sorry, but there we are. The role of fiscal deficits in deleveraging. You can't get out of debt by adding more debt. How often have you read this sentence? It's a cliche. I'm going to argue that, to a first approximation, this obvious, even banal statement is the reverse of the truth, which is that the only way of getting out of debt is to add more debt. You've got to drive the economy into enough confidence for businesses to invest in the future, to employ people, and then for households to spend more, so investment starts turning again. We'll read on. From the body of the article, financially, and this is more a recap of what's come to pass. Financial intermediaries play a crucial role in a bubble economy. The managers and other employees of intermediaries, banks, let's say, can become extraordinarily wealthy by leveraging up the balance sheets of their institutions and those of their customers, the public. Indeed, they are able to create leverage and so money, the other side of the banking sector's balance sheet, at will. The result is more debt and more fragile economy. And here I can throw in that I think I've got agreement with Linda and maybe Blackstone on the fives. And basically this is what we have. We have a poof, poof, or a fountain. Money is fountained out by loaning, and as it comes back in, it just gets destroyed again. So the idea is to keep from the banks to keep the money pumping out. But when it's pumping out in massive amounts and more is staying up in the air, it's very profitable for them indeed. But when it stops and there is general pessimism in business and private sector and government, because they might go to austerity, it's extremely bad for banks. Now, here we go. Now consider what happens when the asset prices start to fall that have been pumped up by this lending out of the fives, which are out there in the real world until the loan is paid back. Debtors will be unambiguously poorer. This is when we're considering what happens when the asset prices start to fall, 2007. Debtors will be unambiguously poorer. Creditors will also feel poorer, since their assets will have deteriorated in quality. Financial intermediaries will become both insolvent and illiquid. I prefer that the other way around. Illiquid, nay, insolvent. There is likely to be a systemic financial crisis, and there has been since 2007, and it's not looking any better. The supply of credit to the private sector will halt. Halt is a bit much, but brakes put on. That's what we have now in the Western world. Borrowing will shrink. Investment, important, investment, because the investment needs to go in to employ more people. Investment, particularly in new housing, will collapse. The desired savings of the heavily indebted will rise as they seek to pay down excessive debt. Creditors too will become far more cautious as they recognize how vulnerable they have become to a wave of bankruptcy among their debtors. Exactly what we have now. The overall effect will be big cutbacks in spending by everyone and a deep recession, if not worse. A big financial crisis will accelerate the cuts and turn the recession into a potential depression. That is, of course, what happened in 2008 and is still going on now. Next one, to C. These forces, later in the article, these forces for shifting the private sector into surplus. These forces for shifting the private sector into surplus are very strong. As the previous post showed, they want to save. People want to save because they're scared. All this, oh, I'm rich because I own Google shares, or oh, I'm rich because the price of my house went up 20% this year, is all gone. And it's kind of, no, let's eat in. But as I also noted, the sum of all sector financial balances must be zero. This is basic accounting. As the Oxford University economist Simon Wren-Lewis notes, sectoral financial balances provide a fundamental check of the feasibility of envisaged adjustments. And this is what they're doing for places like Spain, saying the government stops spending here, there will be a countermand, something will go down, or something has to go up. And if that up doesn't go, it's the GDP that goes down, basically. And that's what they have in Spain. Note in the United Kingdom yesterday when they came out with the third in the series of negative GDPs, which I think have gone -4, -3, and yesterday was -7, 0.3, 0.4, -0.7. But that's quarterly. These are quarterlies, so they're all adding up to about minus 1.5 GDP for the year in the UK. The government sector actually added in that last one, in that as part of that minus 0.7 for the UK, third in the series in the double dipper recession that the UK is going. The government actually added. All this talk of austerity in the UK is very relative. The government was still adding to that GDP, as opposed to places like Greece, where we know it's definitely taking away, and what they're proposing in Spain, which is definitely going to take away, and their GDP is just going to plummet. Where were we? There are only two other sectors, the government and the rest of the world, and we're leaving the rest of the world out of it. So if the household and corporate sectors are to go into surplus, as the over-indebted seek or are forced to pay down their debt, the other two must go into deficit, or the other one that we're looking at. That is exactly what happened. The government has gone massively into deficit, not because of active policy decisions. See, this is interesting to work out what pushes what. All you can say is, from an accounting point of view, it doesn't really matter what pushes what. If we lot save, the government will go into deficit. But as a result of declines in revenue and rising government spending triggered by the post-crisis recession. Now, all of that was leading to the headline of that last article. You can't just leave it, let it collapse, put it into austerity, or you're just going to shrink the entire economy. And if you've got a shrunken economy, well, what have you got except a shrunken economy? Less pie. The pie is smaller. And again, we know that the rich will get more than their fair share. There'll be even less for the poor, middle and the middle classes. Right. So Martin Wolf was obviously quickly attacked on this, that you can't borrow your way out of debt. But you can. If in the United States, in the old days, the thing was, if you went bankrupt once, you went bankrupt and you got on your bike and went at it again. And if you went bankrupt again, you'd say, well, nobody'd lend to you or give you a job. But they would in the United States, because they'd have a positive attitude about it. They'd say, yeah, he's been out there and she has been out there and learned. They've got experience, and it isn't a negative thing. It was a positive thing. They've got experience now. Let them get on their bike again and do it again. Bankrupt, bankroll them and see what you can do next time. And this is what we've got now. It's the equivalent of saying to you, no, you're crap. You just go on the dole or go on instability benefits and sod off. Or bankroll them again. Give them another go. And that's what we've got now. And what Martin Wolf is saying, bankroll the country again. Give it another chance. Because if you don't give it another chance, all you're doing is taking their bike off them and saying, sit at home and watch daytime television. And obviously he was attacked by that, and he came back in the comments with this reply in the comments section. You do not understand. Future generations will pay the price anyway. There seems to be a strange idea floating around that there are some things we can do that will not affect future generations. Almost everything we do affects future generations. If we borrow to sustain the economy, particularly by investing more, we may leave more public debt. Though that is not even certain, because if the economy booms again, like the dot-com boom, the central government goes into surplus, and debts could possibly be paid off if that was ever desirable. But we will also leave a bigger and more productive economy, that's what he's saying, if it's invested correctly, obviously. If I told my grandson that I was going to leave him a basket case economy in order to reduce the proportion of the then lower income he would get in paying tax, he would surely think me a cretin. In other words, he's saying to his grandson, yeah, we've shrunk the economy down, you'll only pay this much tax, but your standard of living's crap, but you'll only pay a little bit of tax. grandson may not be impressed. The point is that these decisions do not only affect the public debt in future. A depression that lowers potential output permanently is even worse bequest for the future. And that's what they've got in Greece now, and what they're soon going to have in Spain. They're going to wipe out a generation. And it gets into the mentality of the people. There's a posh economic name for it, but we won't go into that. But to waste a potential, the potential of a whole generation of people is criminal. And is it worth it? What's it worth it for? What bet are you betting on by saying austerity, 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 shrink everything down? You're betting that when it's all shrunken down, it will become so efficient that it will soon be able to expand itself again. And having to crush it down into that smaller space is one hell of a big responsibility, and it's a big bet to be taking that it will feel itself so dynamic when it's crushed down that it will be able to expand again. Is it better to do that, or give it another chance and bankroll it and put it on its bike again? That's more than enough. Bye.